Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Black Phone 2, starring Mason Thames, Madeline McGraw, Jeremy Davis, Ariana Rivas, Miguel Mora, D.B.M.H, and Ethan Hawke, directed by Scott Derrickson. Now, first off, welcome back to Black Phone when I did that for Halloween. And speaking of which, it's Halloween, so happy Halloween, 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 happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. And let's dig into this, shall we? Because this is a sequel to a movie I've done a few years back. So let's get into it. We open in the Rocky Mountains, Colorado in 1957 with a woman named Hope calling someone about the codes and ice. As we'll learn later in the movie, it's the mother of the protagonists who were the kids in this movie. As I'll explain it later in the movie, and then we move on to the opening credits rolling on to a now 17-year-old Finney, returned by Mason Thames after How to Train Your Dragon, the recent one, getting into fights with people, as I don't care for this Finney, whereas last time he was relatable, but here he smokes and is fighting everyone, while her sister Gwen, played by Madeline McGraw, watching, and Ernesto, played by Miguel Mora, is as he was Robin in last time, and here he's Ernesto, and he wants to get her tickets to Duran Duran, which is a popular 1980s band. And it could be wrong about that. I might be wrong. While Finney tries to act like a badass and feels something is wrong with Finney this time, unlike last time, as he feels pretty dumb this time. As it felt like a poor choice on Mason Thames' part, as he's better off doing a sequel to How to Train Your Dragon in live action than in this role, being all badass and shit like that. Where the fuck did he come up with that? Gwen has a dream of a dead, well, other than the experience that he went through, I'll say. Gwen had a dream of a dead kid riding on ice, like Hope said in the start of the movie, and she wakes up hearing the phone ring from the house where Finney was captured in the last movie, and she wakes up all cold and with Finney waking her up and says she had a bad dream, and I'm like, dreaming of Freddy Krueger because it feels like it. Well, I'll talk about that later. While at school, she's called a witch, and Ernesto says he believes her and brings her some training cards as well as tickets of psychics as well as tickets to Duran Duran. I'm like, oh, don't do that because that's encouraging her even further. And I get she saved her brother last time, but give it a fucking rest. Well, Finney gets a call from a phone booth because cell phones haven't existed yet in this time this movie takes place, and says he can't help them, and we get images of the grabber returned by Ethan Hawke grabbing kids in the past because, and keep in mind, he died in the end of the last movie, as it was Gwen's death once again, and Gwen's dream, once again. And she walks to the house where Finney's was captured last time, and I'm like, does Blumhouse want a reboot of A Nightmare on Elm Street? Because it sure as hell feels like it, as I'm getting vibes from that movie. And Gwen gets a call from Hope from the first scene, and she explains 3 boys are in iced water, and they'll never get out of there, and sees a dead body, and admittedly, this did get a jump out of me, but the scares other than that scene were mostly cheap. Gwen wakes up as the cinematography looked bad in her dreams, while the rest of the movie looked fine, but not great in my opinion. As Gwen leaves with Finney, and she wants to become a counselor in training in a Christian camp in the Rocky Mountains, where their mother was at, and that spoils it. Hope is their mother before she died in the father Terrence, returned by Jeremy Davies, as he seems reluctant about it, as does Finney, until Ernesto takes her there and decides to go with her the next day, as they can't see in a blizzard and make Finney run in the blizzard until they get encouraged by Mustang, played by Ariana Rivas. And when they get there is when I get vibes from another movie that I get the impression Blumhouse wants to reboot, and that is Friday the 13th. Although A24 has that TV show that's coming. I don't know when, but it's coming. because of the campsite and get introduced to the man who runs it named Mando, played by G.B.M.H, and they split them up and to sleep in different cabins, which feels dangerous for Gwen because she's having dreams like the feel like she's in Elm Street. And is this turning out as good as the first movie? Not really, in my opinion. While Gwen dreams, she dreams of the boy making marks in the ice while Finney goes in a phone booth because it rings 3 times and the grabber is on the phone terrorizing him and Gwen with a cheap scare as the 2 boys come up to Gwen while the grabber says hell is just a place and Finney wakes Gwen up and keeps her comfortable as she has markings on her and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a Nightmare on Elm Street all over again, and she sleeps with Ernesto while teasing Jesus to make her, Jesus, excuse me, to not make her dream again, which is something you can't help in general. And Ernesto wants to date Gwen as he says her mother would love her as a Christian girl, and she confesses about her mother, and he says she's beautiful. Until Finney interrupts their conversation, and the next day comes, and Gwen tells Finney Ernesto knows as they're investigating the case. And why am I not caring about this as much? Because I don't know who the fuck to care about in this movie. Mando makes them have breakfast and with them and asks them why are they here, and they say because of their mother Hope going there, and Ernesto tagged along for the investigation, and they call their parents where Finney hears the phone ring and gets a call from 3 boys as we get stuff from with the kids talking from the first movie until Finney hangs up on as Terrence wants to find them in the campground while Kenneth talks nicely to and Barbara talks to Gwen like she's the devil. And was this necessary? Absolutely not. And we move on to nighttime and she dreams of Hope at Alpine Lake. And I'm getting a bunch of vibes from Friday the 13th as this doesn't feel like a sequel to The Black Phone anymore, as that magic is lost with this movie. Gwen wakes up to a dream as Finney and Ernesto get to Gwen's cabin while Finney talks with the grabber and he says a line I liked, which was dead is just a word, which was said in the trailer, and later in the scene, vengeance is mine. While the grabber attacks Gwen in her dream and like Freddy Krueger would while Finney with everyone on site saved Gwen's life, and it kind of upsets me that the magic of the first Black Phone movie is now gone, but I'm not laughing like in any Conjuring movie, as this movie in particular, as this feels like more Friday the 13th mixed with Nightmare on Elm Street at best. Finney, Gwen, Ernesto, Barbara, Mando, Kenneth, and Mustang have a meeting about how to keep Gwen safe while Barbara comes off in denial like Gwen is possessed, and Finney talks about how he killed the grabber as he was brought up, and they say he was here, and Mando brings up how people went missing because of the grabber, and Finney brings up the grabber as being in the photo and had a name which was Wild Bill Heacock, which is a name I probably won't stick with for the Ethan Hawke character. And Mando and Mustang wants to help Finney, Gwen, and Ernesto look for the 3 dead boys at dawn, and they rest for the night as Mando talks with the grabber, and aka Bill, and terrorizes Mando with a couple of giant snowballs, which did feel pretty cheap as a scare, for this whole movie. Before dawn comes, Mando talks about what he does for a living with Finney as he was strong enough to fight the grabber, and he says he was going to kill Gwen and Dawn at dawn. And comes, they look for the kids in the iced water, and the day goes by quickly with some nice shots, which isn't enough for me to care. And that's my problem, is that I just don't give a shit and nighttime comes, and we learn Ernesto is Robin's brother, and it took me to my second viewing to learn that they were brothers, despite I knew there was something familiar about the actor, as Finney and Ernesto get shifts to wake Gwen up from her dream while she dreams of Hope going to the garage to hang herself, while I was like, oh, come on, it's the grabber. Like, how many fucking movies have I seen with Jason and Freddy Krueger at this point? And the answer is almost every single motherfucking last one of them. as that was predictable and a cliche that I just cannot accept. While Gwen is dreaming, the grabber goes after her and gets cut, and she finds Mando on in the ice trying to let them out, and she tries to get out of the phone booth and wins the fight with the grabber, and eventually Ernesto, Finney, and Mustang get her out of the dream to rescue Mando from the ice cold water, and he says he found one of them, and Mustang knocks on Kenneth and Barbara's door and asks for the help with while Barbara is reluctant about it because she believes Gwen is the devil. And Gwen and Finney see Terrence at the campground trying to get them the fuck out of there as she narks on Finney out for the joint he smokes. And at one point, I just don't care as much as the original Black Phone. And I was expecting this to be worse than Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, but it didn't turn out that way as much, so I'm kind of happy about that. Finney decides he doesn't want to be angry anymore as he was careless this whole movie, and Gwen talks them into staying at the camp until their mission is completed. And at the end of the mission starts at dawn, and they continuously look for the two other boys as it goes by quickly again, and dusk comes, but not completely, as Gwen starts to sleep and dream of getting a way to defeat the grabber, as it starts with him ice skating, and he grabs Kenneth and Barbara and cuts them and the other two boys show up while Finney almost dies with Gwen pushing them to the grabber with the help of Mando. And I swear to God, it makes me think of that character in The Mandalorian, but let's move on. And the grabber says to Gwen she's alone while she has friends, and they grab the grabber and cut him in the most painful way possible. And it's turning out the movie is mediocre. And it's turning this movie mediocre, let me rephrase that. Finney smashes the grabber on the ice, and the grabber gets his legs cut off, and he dies and burns in hell again, and he's officially defeated by death. And next day comes, and Gwen getting a call by Hope, aka her mother, as she says she loves both her and Finney, and they drive out of the campsite. And this climax was mediocre, but how mediocre was this movie? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 5.2 out of 10. Not quite as good as the first Black Phone movie because this lost the magic of the original movie. There were vibes I was getting from A Nightmare on Elm Street with the dream sequences to Friday the 13th with the movie mostly taking place on a campsite. And this felt all over the place. Well, don't get me wrong, I think the movie was alright. I was just expecting it was going to suck harder than it did like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 remake did. But it's better than that, as the characters felt weaker here than in the last film, like Ethan Hawke's the grabber, who is barely in this movie, and he's supposed to be dead. Jason or Freddy Krueger, as that was fine, but it's not those movies. There were a couple of times the movie did scare me, as I will not deny that, but the story was pretty weak for me, and there were times the cinematography was good, and there were times it was fuzzy to look at, and like when Gwen was dreaming, and it looked bad. And director Scott Derrickson doesn't do the best job at telling what the characters went through, as Finney feels pretty dumb, as I don't care for his arc, which makes this movie about Gwen and her story was mediocre in my opinion. I honestly don't know why we have a sequel, as it felt like it wasn't too necessary, and people are saying this is better than the first movie. That shocks me, because it isn't. And this is a weak recommendation for the movie because other than one jump scare I had, I thought the scares were pointless, and I didn't laugh at it like any with Conjuring Last Rites, for example, and it is better than most of those films. But at the end of the day, it didn't satisfy me, and like I said, it was just okay. Not a great movie by any means, nor is it the worst. And they better not make a part 3 because I just don't care for these movies and their characters anymore. But one more time, just a mediocre film. So I'd like to thank you guys for returning to Black Phone with me. And until we ever get a sequel, happy Halloween, everyone.